We want you to know that sharing your story, right, is beneficial to both yourself and the world. And when we talk about this, I want you to know about how you might not think that what you're saying is important, but I will tell you what, if you even tell just a glimpse of maybe a piece of your story, it could inspire someone. And it can truly, when we say just one thing can change the world, that's absolutely true. So as we're thinking tonight and as we're talking and you're thinking to yourself, I really want you to think about your story that you have to share and how it might help the next person. And I'm going to give you some personal examples as well this evening. So when we talk about here's what professionals say about hearing a family story. And this is something where when you ask questions that will allow a parent to share their feelings was never encouraged in school. I now look at a family story as a gift, and it opens opportunities for meaningful intervention, which is satisfying to both professionals and parents. And I'd like to say that I didn't introduce myself very well, but I cover Northeast Oklahoma and for Oklahoma Family Network, and I have 3 children, and my oldest is 21. She has Down syndrome, lots of behavioral health challenges and medical issues. And then I also have a son that has given me permission to share that is almost 20, a freshman at OU. And he experiences a lot of anxiety, depression. He has ADHD, he's been on a 504 plan. And then I have almost a 17-year-old that's a sophomore in high school. So when I say that, I want to tell you that I'm coming from a place that I'll give you a little bit of a glimpse of our story, just so you can kind of get an idea of how easy it is to share your story. And when we talk about this evening, I want you to know that there's various ways that you can share your story. So don't think that the only way you have to share your story is just by telling it. And so I'm planting that seed for what we'll talk about later this evening. So when you think about, why all of a sudden it sometimes doesn't want to go to the next one. Sorry, I don't know. There we go. So what can happen when you tell your story, right? You are raising awareness and you're promoting sensitivity, right? You're improving services and supports. You're impacting professionals. You're impacting legislative and policies. So now that you see that, I'm going to go back and give a little bit more information about each one of those. For example, with my daughter, she, like I said, has Down syndrome, right? I started the Buddy Walk, which raises awareness of Down syndrome in the community. That was something that I was very passionate about doing. I will tell you what, when I would go and talk to sponsors and try to get donations and sponsors for the Buddy Walk, and I would share just a little bit about our story. So I would say, yes, my daughter, she's Down syndrome and I didn't know prenatally, and we've met some great people and I've been able to, she's impacted so many people. She's changed their lives in so many ways. She's such a blessing. Every time I would go and talk to someone about getting a sponsorship, guess what? I was telling my story. I was raising awareness. So even something simple as that is raising awareness in your community. Improving services and supports. We have had some challenges over the years with maybe it be some of our services at our public high school. We've had some issues when we had in-home support waived or the community waiver, right? There's been some things that have happened. If I had not spoken up and I had not told people about what we were doing, there's some things that might not have ever changed. But in order for change to happen, we have to be willing to be vulnerable and we have to be willing to tell people. Because if you know that saying that nobody knows until you tell them, right? Nobody knows until you tell them. Oh, I apologize. So that's one thing that we want to talk about is telling your story can really improve things. Some of the things that have changed, whether it be with DHS, whether it has been through Sooner Start, they have advisory committees, right? And they seek out people to tell their stories. And so the families that have shared, that is the reason why those changes have been made. when it impacts professionals. When I go to a doctor's appointment or whenever I'm talking to a teacher and I am saying a little bit about some of the challenges that maybe we're having at home, and they're understanding a little bit what life is like by having a child that has a disability or a behavioral health challenge, right? They're understanding just a little bit. And when you personalize it, it makes them, it's not just a diagnosis. It's not just, oh, this is a ADHD or this is just anxiety. It really makes people think about, wow, that person is experiencing that feeling, right? And so, and again, the legislator, we're going to talk this evening of how you can have different ways to tell your story, whether it be, there's a speech that I give, right? And when I say speech, I mean telling my story. There's a way when I go to speak, to tell my story to get a sponsorship. There's a way I tell my story when I want to get maybe something changed within my state on the legislation levels. So there's kind of that 2-minute elevator speech, right? Or there's that 5-minute doctor speech. And each one, you have to know your audience. And we're going to talk about that a lot this evening. You have to know your audience in order to appropriately tell the story that you want to tell. So we're going to think about word power. So when I say this, really think that the way we speak about ourselves and others is so powerful. And when I say that, for example, we want people to know about ourselves. And when you think about it, we're going to practice that here in a second, about what we want people to know about ourselves. Words are so, so powerful. So what do you say about yourself? For example, when you first meet someone, what do you want them to know, right? Do you want them to know your interests? Do you want them to know your age, your job? What do you want them to know about you? So again, you have to know your audience, right? So when I got on this call today, if you notice, I introduced myself and I told you, because I know that this training is for ones that have families or professionals, educators that deal with families that have behavioral health care challenges or have a child or a young adult with a disability or a special healthcare need. So I'm tailoring that. I told you a little bit about myself for this audience, right? But if I am standing up in front of a group of educators, and which I was a teacher, I like to say, in my previous life, right? And I say that in a way that when I'm standing up with a group of educators, I'm going to talk about more terms like, okay, this is what I used to do. I was a community school coordinator and I did after school programs and I taught 3rd grade. So I would give them more information about myself that was beneficial to them, right? Yes, that might be beneficial to you, but I'm going to hit on the key points according to the audience that I'm going to tell. Okay, does that make sense to everybody? So you have to kind of think about who your audience is, and then that's how you're going to tell that appropriate story. You might give more information about yourself, about your professions and what you did, if that pertains to what you're talking about to them. We also think about our words. We advocate by the way we speak. And I'm going to tell you this, when you're telling your story, direct your focus on the person, okay? And the most important thing you can do is you want to use family and person supportive language. I love that. It's called people first language, but family and person supportive language is not only another way to describe that, and we'll go into people first language, but when you use family and person supportive language, that is including the whole family. You're not saying you're going to do this, you do this, we do this, right? We as our family do this. We use that language that supports that person. People first language, they are people first, and then they have their diagnosis. And the reason when I want to say that, in fact, I'm going to go back to this slide, is that people first language would mean I get told all the time, oh, you have a Down's child. And I reply very nicely, yes, I have a child with Down syndrome, right? I'm putting the person first and then their disability. Instead of saying that is an autistic child, you could say, oh, that child has autism. We would not ever go in front of a group of people and say, this is my cancerous mother-in-law. No, of course not. We're not going to say that. Doesn't define who that person is. So by saying that she's my mother-in-law, she just might happen to have cancer, correct? So in saying that, you never want to say that handicapped child or that disabled child. No, that is not the way we say it. We say that person that has a disability or that person that has a behavioral health challenge, right? Behavioral health challenge is kind of one of those inclusive terms that can mean ADHD, it can mean bipolar, it could just mean experiencing anxiousness. It could be any type of behavior. It does not have to be a diagnosis. So by saying behavioral health challenge, that's just saying they have a challenge in some area that deals with behavior. You're not really saying exactly what that is. So it's kind of like the umbrella, right? So think about that when we say behavioral health challenge. It doesn't necessarily mean a specific diagnosis, but using that people first language, I'm going to give you an example of just a way that this can happen. Another story is I like to say that you never know, right, what's going on in that person's life when you are telling your story. So people interpret things differently, right? Because they have their own background experience, right? We all come with like this preconceived notion of what certain things are. And so when we come to the table, basically, we already have that idea. So sometimes words don't mean the same to other people. And I say that in the way that, again, words can be hurtful and we don't know someone's background. So think about this. I was at getting our dog one of their shots. We were at the vet clinic and we were waiting in line, and I was with my daughter, and my daughter has kind of this humming noise that she does when she gets really nervous, right? And so she was doing that kind of, and she had a bad day. We're experiencing a lot of regression lately. So she's had some days that are really hard to deal with. And I was just kind of bummed that day, right? Some days are harder than others. We can all relate, right? We all have those days. And I'm standing there and this dog is not doing the right thing. And this lady is behind me and literally said, "Oh my gosh, my dog won't listen, my dog," and used the R word, right? And I'm standing there, had a bad day. My daughter's humming. My daughter has Down syndrome with, if you look at the definition, as mental retardation. And she said that, and I just wanted to crawl under a rock right then, right? Depends on the day. I was with her, so I just decided I just kind of gave her a look. And again, when I say that, people don't say things intentionally most of the time, to be mean. They just need to be educated. So I say that in the way, by us using the correct terms, we are educating the community. We are educating our doctors. We are educating the professionals. And so by saying then, oh, and trust me, I know several of you like, you should have said something. And trust me, I do, right? It kind of depends on the day and the time and the moment. But at that time, by not using those words, you are educating people in turn. I also want to
There's a question in the chat for you, Erin.
Yes, go ahead.
What is family and person supportive language? What does that mean?
Perfect. So, and thank you so much for asking. So when you say family and supportive, and in fact, I need to make a slide that has a lot more examples of this. But one of the things that we say, when you would say, and I'm trying to think of some really good examples. So if we say family centered, that would be like when we would talk about how as a family, what would be this way? Caught me off guard because usually I'm switching my brain to this part. It would be more of a perfect example would say for family support, it would be like, our family, right, chooses to do this type of therapy, right? And it's you're supporting the whole family. So you're saying, for example, oh, our family, we go and we choose to do occupational therapy. And these are the reasons behind that. It's supporting the whole family. And in fact, Rhiannon, if you will look and if you find some exact terminology, and we'll talk about that here in just a minute. And it's only because when I get off track sometimes about a question like that, I want to give that time and detail, and then we will definitely give you more examples. But think of it like that. You're describing your whole family. You're saying you're saying us as a whole. And it's not just this child is bad. That's another one. So with family supportive language, you are not saying this child is the reason why all of our issues. You are truly giving them the benefit of us as a family are working towards a goal, right? It's not just you, it's not just the child, it's the whole family. Hope I answered that question appropriately to give you that. So another thing is people with disabilities, they're not superhumans. And this is sometimes, I will tell you, excessive praise is just as inappropriate as little praise. And I will tell you that I am probably the worst at this because I am very much oh, this is so great. This is so good, right? Well, we want to keep it to where we're not exaggerating or we're not underrepresenting their ability or their disability, right? So be accurate, right? So saying my daughter has anxiety and she really gets anxious when she goes to a birthday party, right? We're not saying, oh my gosh, she gets so nervous and it's just terrible. She has these meltdowns and I don't know what to do. So let's just keep it to the facts, right? Let's keep the facts. Let's be accurate when we describe it. My daughter experiences extreme, and you could even say, my daughter experiences extreme anxiety when she goes to birthday parties, right? Think about that statement that I just said, okay? Verse, oh my gosh, I don't know what to do. She gets so nervous and see how that's different? If everybody can just kind of think about that. See how I literally described one and I really was accurate in my description. Think about if you went into a meeting or you were talking to a therapist or you were you were going in and talking to a coworker about your daughters or your sons or your grandchild, whoever you're caregiving for. Think about if you could just give that brief description. That paints a picture in their head, right? They really understand what you're trying to say by being accurate. This is one of the biggest things. Your story changes over time. And what you share depends on your audience, okay? So when we say that, like, for example, my story is an ongoing story, right? And sometimes, like we all talked about, what I share is different depending on the audience. But it's okay for that story to have up and downs. If you ask me about how she's doing one day and you ask me about something that she does the other day, right? That's okay that the story changes. And sometimes we get stuck. And I am the first one to admit, I don't like sometimes to talk about the bad part. And I mean bad in the challenges and some of the struggles that we face sometimes when I'm sharing my story. But that's what makes it our story. And that's what could help another family. And I will tell you that with sharing my story, like I said, my daughter was diagnosed with Down syndrome regression disorder. And I'm on this Facebook page, and she was in the hospital about 3 months, and I got on this page and it was a lifeline to me, right? And again, those were people telling their stories through a simple Facebook page. It gave me so much hope. It gave me so much encouragement, and I was able to share our story, and I didn't feel alone. And that's one thing that is really important, is a lot of times when you tell your story and you open up, you find out that there are a lot of people out there that are experiencing the same type of challenges that you might be sharing or experiencing, and you're not going to feel as alone. It is truly become that lifeline that has helped me so much. And that's only because people were willing to talk about it. Did you know that you are already a storyteller? I just realized the slide says you are already be a storyteller, but you are already a storyteller by the The fact that you are getting on this call tonight and giving up an hour of your time to listen to me and just learn to tell your story, you are already going to be able to tell it in a way that's unique to you. And everybody's a storyteller in their own way. And there's different ways to be a storyteller. So your personal experiences that you have with your family, your expertise, your personal experiences, the information that you have, community members. Did you know that, for example, when I wear my Oklahoma Family Network shirt, right? We have a staff shirt. And I am literally at the grocery store. Do you know how many times someone's gone, what's OFN, right? What is that? Well, right then it's a nonprofit. We help kids with special needs. And how'd you get involved in that? Well, my daughter has Down syndrome. I'm telling my story right there. Do you know how many times someone says, oh my gosh, can I get that information? I have, someone that could benefit from from that organization. Again, that is just a brief snippet of me telling my story. I can tell my story with the grocery store worker. You can tell your story with someone that's sitting at the waiting room. I encourage you, when you're sitting around at maybe a therapy office or in the waiting room, or you're at a parent night at school and someone starts talking about their child and their behaviors, just saying, you know what, we've actually kind of had those challenges at home myself. What things have you done, right? That's opening up the door for someone to share their story. So it doesn't have to be this, oh, I'm going to write my story out, or, oh, I'm going to dedicate 15 minutes to telling my story. Absolutely not. You can just take little snippets and use it when you think is appropriate to tell your story, because you can tell it anywhere. I will have to tell you that my daughter was getting some treatments in Oklahoma City, and we would go to the same Sonic every single time. And this guy at the Sonic said, oh, I can always tell you're always here at the same time. And, and we always got the same thing, because she would just have a procedure and get soft foods. And I said, yeah, we're over here. And he kind of looked back and he said, oh my gosh, he said, my son has a lot of behavioral health. And then I have, a cousin that has Down syndrome. And we sat there, and of course I felt bad. I held up the line, but I was telling my story at the Sonic drive-in. And guess what? He now is involved, and he gets information from us. So it can be something as simple as that. Why do we tell our story? So we tell our story to inspire people. We teach them. We share that information. We connect. We make things stick, right? We help them learn. Just by tonight, you attending this, we're connecting, right? Maybe hopefully you'll take just a little bit of what I'm saying and be able to use it, and using words like know your audience, right? That's something that we want to make that stick to you. We want to know your audience is so, so important. And again, nobody can tell your story the way you can tell your story. So please remember that there is no wrong way to tell your story. Okay. No, absolutely wrong way. You can tell as much of it or as little of the story. You can absolutely tell it the way that you want to tell it. So your story and your helpful suggestions can improve programs and services. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that. When they send out surveys, whether it be from your DHS caseworker, maybe it's a survey at, for example, we were at OU Children's for a long time, and I get surveys all the time after we go to a doctor's appointment. Several of you probably can relate. A lot of times that's part of their, as soon as you leave an appointment, they have a survey to fill out. Did you know that by filling out that survey, and by truly telling them, not just saying you need to improve your services, because that's going to get people nowhere, but by giving them ways they can improve and truly taking the time to fill those out, they truly take that information, use it, right, to improve services. I made a simple suggestion one time, absolutely simple, when saying that when people come in the room, and they would offer like, oh, do you want the therapy dog to come in? And we were at the hospital, right? I would say so many times, I would love to know they would come in and say, Taylor, do you want to, you want the therapy dog to come in, or do you want to do crafts? And immediately she stresses out about stuff like that, right? So she gets very anxious, and we didn't know it was coming. But when I asked one of the nurses and I said, you know what, could you tell me, like, when you're getting ready to come into our room about 5 minutes ahead of time that you're going to be asking us if we want to see a dog or we want to participate in a craft, if I can prepare her for that? Oh man, I think someone might be coming in here soon and asking us if we want to participate. She always said yes then, right? So that was something simple. I was able to say, you know, my daughter really has a lot of anxiety about being put on the spot, and she usually says no to things that once you ask her, but if she has time to process it, and we can kind of tell her what's going to go on and that it's not a scary event, that could help. By me telling that and a little bit of our story about how she had anxiety, we were able to make a change. And I hope that they still continue to use that today. When we talk about your audience, so when you know your IEP team or a new doctor or a therapist, case manager, one thing that you always want to think about is how much time do you have, right? And is there something specific you want to talk about tonight or today or whenever you're going to have your meeting? So we're going to talk about how you really need to have a plan and how to execute that plan. For example, if I did not have this PowerPoint, those of you that are on the call that know me, I have ADHD myself. I would be so off topic. I'd probably be talking about this great Diet Dr. Pepper that I have, this new flavor. Again, so having a PowerPoint is a way that I keep track, right, of telling you what I'm going to tell you tonight. And that is okay to use. Jot down some notes before you go. But again, knowing how much time you have and what your audience is so important. Well, we can be organized, right? That is the best way to get the most out of your time. And it also helps you get the outcome you want. So having a thoughtful and organized story also makes you seem more credible. Again, I'm going to kind of go back to what I said a minute ago about giving that story about being accurate. If you think about it, if I just say to you, oh man, she's been having so many meltdowns and she's just running in there and she just gets so anxious and I just don't know what to do. Again, think about what I just said. And now by me saying my daughter really experiences anxiousness and gets very nervous when new things arise, you probably got a much better idea because I seem to know what I was talking about because I didn't, get frazzled myself. When we get frazzled ourselves, we don't seem as credible. Okay, that's something to think about. So think about how you can organize the way you tell your story in a thoughtful and meaningful way, right? But think about, and we're going to get to this, about what the keys to success are. So spend time thinking about what you want to say, prepare some notes or an outline, but there's a 3-point theme template that we like to think about. And I feel like this is very easy and self-explanatory, but if you really think about it, a beginning, middle, and end. And I know that sounds so simple and it's so common sense. It absolutely is. But by really writing down your story, and I will tell you, I do a lot of times, I've had to share our story in different ways, whether it be in a medical document or whether it be in front of a group of educators or professionals. And what I always like to do a lot of times is you can do that voice to text. You know how if you just go on voice memos and you practice telling your story and then play it back, it's really interesting. Right? Because I'll think that I am hitting all the points I want. But if you just use that voice memo on your phone and you jot some points down, you could then listen to it and say, you know what? I really need to say this at the beginning of my story. Or, I really feel like I need to end it, or this would be really good in the middle. So taking that voice memo or writing it down, whichever way, journaling it, however you want to do that, but then looking at it and using this template. I strongly encourage you to think about having that beginning, middle, and end, because you sound so much more credible if you stay on point and you stay where you're supposed to stay. One of the things we also want to do is we want to track our time, and we want to thank people for their time. So whether it be you're talking to a doctor, whether you're talking to a new therapist or a new teacher or a new client, for those of you that are case managers or educators on the phone, I will tell you that there is not a time that whenever I say, I know that was so long, thank you for taking the time to listen. I feel like you needed to get the whole picture before you started helping my child. That's kind of my go-to phrase, honestly, is by saying, thank you for listening. Thank you for your time. Because by telling them that just kind of, it sets a tone, right? We're all about setting a tone. And by setting a tone and thanking them of that, and it's also being respectful. I know that I have you guys tonight till 7:30. So I've practiced this presentation so I can make sure that I stay within that time frame, right? That's being respectful. So again, keeping track of the time that you're given. Use the really stories and feel comfortable. But if you don't feel comfortable sharing that part of the story, that's okay. The one thing that I had, we did a video recently about our stay at OU Children's, and I got really emotional there for a minute. I usually kind of hold it together pretty good, but she'd been struggling the past couple of days with right before the video, and they asked me some questions, and I kind of just lost it there for a minute. I got real emotional, and I remember them saying to me, that's okay if you don't want to share that part. This is your story. It made me feel so relieved, and I ended up sharing it because I feel like I just got that breath of fresh air right then when I didn't feel nervous. And so again, it is important also, again, if you notice what I said about sharing my son's story about him having ADHD and anxiety and depression, I got his permission to share that. Even if I know he's over 18, but even if they're 10, 9, talk to your family members and talk to them. Is it okay if I share that story? But also tell them, because I think you could really help someone. I think by telling them what kind of strategies we've used at home for behavior, that might really help your teacher understand how they can help you at school. So by telling your student or your child that about how they can help someone else, that is so powerful, right? That is just so, so powerful. Use those examples and keep that situation real. That's another thing I want you to realize, is you want to keep that situation real. This is the challenging part about it. You do not want to share too much information at one time. You know, there is so much information I could tell you tonight, but I know I need to keep on track and keep it to 1 hour. So this is, again, why you need to know your audience and why you need to know how much time you have. If you have an hour of a case manager's time, start and fill up that hour. But if you only have 5 minutes to share your story with a new doctor, have a 5-minute version. I literally have a 2-minute, a 5-minute, 10-minute, and then like an hour presentation of our personal story and experiences, right? So kind of have that, but make sure you're hitting on those key points. The one thing that is hard, and I'll tell you, it's hard. We have tried some things and treatments with my daughter. Some people aren't going to try, and they don't think that they want to try that. And you know what? That's okay. That's their story. That is their choice. So all I say is that is what my family has chosen. And kind of going back to your question about that family centered and that support language, that's another example. And I kind of knew we'd get into it a little bit more. So that's why I'm sorry I didn't answer all those questions at the beginning. But that's a good way to say it, that our family chose that. This is what our family has chosen to do or to pursue or to try. But again, by saying that, you're not saying that their opinion is wrong, but you're just saying, this is what I chose. It's almost like the respectable way of saying, I chose not to do what you're suggesting. I chose my way, right? We also don't want to offer a solution because, again, being respectful to both sides of that, we don't want to say, this is what you need to do. And I tried this medicine and this is what I think everybody should do. Don't do that when you're telling your story, just because that makes it too, it kind of changes that tone of, oh, they're trying to push this on me. And you don't want to do that, right? Because your experience is very different from someone else's experience. And again, you don't want to ever say something that you don't want others to repeat. As much as we can trust people, I choose to trust people, but again, I know that if I am choosing to say something on a Zoom or maybe in an email or a text, that can be shared very quickly. And some people might not realize that that information was personal to you. So it's not like they're trying to, share too much. A lot of times people just don't realize what information is so personal to some people. So that's why whatever you're sharing, you need to know that that is out there, right? And they might not realize that. When you present, you want to be comfortable, you want it to be yourself. Zoom is really hard, especially in a presentation like this. If you've attended one of my calming water bottles or one of our hope ring, I love the interaction. It is really hard because right now I cannot see faces. I'm in presentation style on the Zoom. And so I can't see those interactions. And I love that. I thrive on that to kind of interact with people. So I know that I have to adjust myself and I have to be comfortable in this type of presentation style versus one that's maybe in person and very interactive. So that's something to also consider. Everyone gets nervous when they tell their story. So one of the funny things is having a water bottle or having a pop or a drink available, that kind of gives you the opportunity to take a breath. It gives you the opportunity to kind of reset. Maybe if someone asks you something that's a little too personal, you just kind of can reset. So it's kind of a natural way to take a drink. So now that I've said that, if you're looking and you're at a presentation or you have a keynote speaker, kind of notice sometimes that you can tell that maybe they're talking about a really personal situation and they might take a drink of water. And that's the way to do it. Also, it's okay to be nervous. Nervous energy can actually add strength to your presentation because your story is important. I tend to talk fast. I have to really be careful about that whenever I'm on presentations or in telling my story. I just have that type of personality. I'm a fast talker, so I have to realize that. So that's something that I've had to work on. So if you know that you tend to talk fast or you tend to talk slow or you have certain phrases that you like to say, and I'm sure by the end of this, you're going to say, well, you say this a lot, you say this a lot. We all have those things that we say during presentations, but by really thinking about that sometimes it's okay. It's okay because especially when you're telling something that is hard to talk about, it's okay to be emotional about it. That's okay. When you're handling questions, you can always talk about when you're telling your story, you can decide whether you want to answer one-on-one, whether I told you at the beginning of this, it was okay to unmute. And Rhiannon knows that she can ask questions that are in the chat as we are going through this presentation. That does not bother me, right? Especially if I know we're going to touch on it later, but you have to decide what is better for you, right? And if you have someone say and ask you a question that said, do you mind me telling me more about, that situation that you had with that teacher? I'm going to tell you my personal opinion. If I am fine with telling my story, but I I say this a lot. It's your story to tell. I feel like it's their story to tell. So if someone says, have you had this experience with someone that you've been working with, or you know what? I will be happy to ask them if they're comfortable in sharing their story with you, because that's their story to tell. Let's not tell other people's stories. Let's stick to our stories and ask them their permission. And it's okay to say that's their story to tell. Okay, that's something I really encourage you to use in your vocabulary. Vocabulary is just saying that's their story to tell. And also to say, you know what, right now I'm having a hard time dealing with that in my personal life. So I'd rather not get there, maybe at a different time. That is okay. But I encourage you to have your go-to phrases that you are going to use. So that way you don't fumble through it and you can pull those out real quick, right? You can pull those go-to phrases that you've chosen to use when you get into a situation that you don't feel comfortable in. This is the thing. Are you nervous? Practice, practice, practice. And one of the things is we can offer one-on-one assistance. We can do this, but I'm going to show you another way to do this. I have this telling your story presentation, and this is where if we were in person, we would practice and we could do breakout rooms, or we could figure out that way, because the more you practice and tell your story, I talk about it all the time in the car to myself, because if I'm getting ready to talk to a family or an IEP meeting or a case manager, I go over what I'm going to say in the car. That's the way, or in the shower. People do it all the time, right? You find people talking to themselves all over. So this is the time, but for the sake, because I know all of us have very limited time. And so I'm going to show you a little bit more of how you can work on telling your story. You can share your story, not just by writing it, not just by talking it. Write a poem, write a song. Maybe you want to put together a lot of inspirational quotes. Some people, they journal, they draw. I mean, people can do, I don't know how many, my kiddos when they were younger were in play therapy. And one of the things that they would talk about is they would have them, why don't you draw how you're feeling today? Or why don't you draw your favorite memory, right? Then they can tell the story about that drawing, right? Maybe it's a photo, using a photo book. There's nothing better than looking back at a scrapbook. And how many times do you have a friend and you're like, oh my gosh, let me show you these videos or these pictures, and then you tell them a million stories about what happened, because that kind of gets us started, right? So I always start with a picture of my daughter if I'm talking about her at that particular event or telling that story, because that gets me started. And that's like, this is why I'm telling my story, right? This is because of her. But people do that all different ways. So just know there's lots of different ways that you can share your story. You can make a difference, right? People have different perspectives. I talk differently when I am coming from an educator point of view. I talk differently if I'm coming from it as a parent support partner or as a parent, right? But all in all, what we want to do is we want to give them hope, right? We want to talk about what's helped, what hasn't helped, right? And it's okay to say, I tried this, but again, going back to that family supportive language that we talked about earlier, by saying this helped me and my family in this way, but it might be different from yours, and that's okay. And by telling people that's okay, when you give them that story, maybe you didn't do this, and that's okay. Because I will tell you that, I talked about this regression Facebook that I'm on. And when I have that regression in Facebook, and sometimes I see some of the things people are doing, and they did it right when their child got diagnosed. And I didn't find this page for a long time because it took us a while to get to a diagnosis. I feel so guilty sometimes because I thought, gosh, what if I had known about this earlier? Or What if I would have found this page earlier? What if I would have tried this medicine? Maybe it would have changed the outcome, and maybe she wouldn't have been this, this way now. And maybe I could, maybe, what if? We could what if stuff all the time. But by saying, someone on this page said, if you are far in this journey and you just found this page, that's okay. Pick up where you are now and go from here. By hearing that and by seeing that, it was like a breath of fresh air. It made me feel so much better. I didn't beat myself up about it. So when you're telling your story and people start to say, oh, I should have, I could have, I would have, kind of stop them in their tracks and just say, it's okay. Take the knowledge that you know right here and now, and let's use what you learn now and moving forward. You can't look back and you can't what if stuff all day long. So by practicing telling your story, right now we're going to do this quickly because I have a little bit more to share. But if you could think of a memory that you remember vividly, right? And it's a memory that it came to you, right? I'll give you just a few seconds. Think of it real quick. Just one that pops up. Okay. Why did you remember that? And how did it make you feel? These are just some examples: sadness, joy, fear, disgust, anger. Again, right there, just taking that, and you can look at that website that is listed on the presentation screen. That is a good way to practice telling your story. And you can have your kids do this. So it could be something that you just practice in the car, make a fun game of it. One day, this is my favorite quote, one day you will tell your story of how you overcame what you went through, and it will be someone else's survival guide. I don't think there is any better quote to put in this telling your story training than this quote right here. Because I will tell you, by sharing my story of what our journey through regression has been like, I have been able to connect with some amazing people. And as you guys know, by telling my story to them and connecting, I have learned so much from them, because so many times when we tell and we help others, we in turn help ourselves, right? When we think that, oh, I'm going to go and volunteer and do this and this and this, in turn, we become better ourselves. And so that's something to think about by telling your story. So what's your story? So when we think about what your story is, we can use what we call a one-page profile. A one-page profile is something that captures that most important information about a person, and we focus on their individual core qualities and abilities. You can create this one-page profile, and this is something that Pinterest is an absolute blessing to us on one-page profiles. If you just Google one-page profile, or you can also put in an all about me book. That's another way, all about me page or an all about me book, one-page profile. On Pinterest, they have some amazing examples, or just through Google themselves. But look at what we put on this snapshot. Right now, just by looking at this, you have this cute picture of this girl. You obviously know she probably loves Mickey and Minnie, right? And look at what some of the things are on here. What makes me happy? How to care for me, I am good at, I am working on, others love about me, and how I communicate. My favorite part of this is I'm working on. This doesn't say what is hard. This doesn't say my challenges. This doesn't say my weaknesses. This simply says I'm working on. And you could use that language when you tell your story. If you're saying it about your son or daughter, you could say, my daughter, she's really working on focusing on sitting still more at school, right? Well, we know that you mean that that's hard for her to sit still at school. But by saying she's working on, you're not saying that she's a failure. You're not saying that she's, has tried and never done that. You're saying she's working on it, right? So it's just a different way to approach it. How I communicate. That way, there are ways, if you have a child that's nonverbal, they might communicate by using sign language, or maybe they use a communication device, or maybe they draw pictures, however that is. They communicate by giving hugs. Those are things. But one thing I love is others love about me. That is where you incorporate your family and friends and people that support the individual that you're serving, and you ask them, what do you like about him? I tell you, it was so awesome when I would ask people, what do you love about my daughter? And they would say, oh, she giggles. She has the best giggle, or she has the best sense of humor. She's so spunky. She's so sassy. That makes us feel good, right? So we can share this with others. We can give this, and here's another example of one. What I'm working on, best ways to support me, and my goals, right? Look underneath there. I love to dance. I love to sing. You're giving a picture of this child. You are telling their story by this piece of paper. So it really goes hand in hand. And this is a great way to start telling your story by using this one-page profile and kind of make it to where you look at this and then you can remember stories. So on the part that says my goals, drawing shapes, writing, you can kind of maybe start using that to form your beginning, middle, and end from this one-page profile, right? Because we're thinking of memories of how she coped through maybe some of the things that she's working on, or some of the ways you can support. This is how you can start a one-page profile. I encourage each and every one of you to make sure that you go to lifecoursetools.com. This is a fabulous, fabulous website that has all kinds of information on it. And this does, if you look at it at the top, it says the vision for the life I want. And at the bottom, it says what I don't want. And then it has this arrow pointing up the trajectory of how you're going to get to the vision of the life you want. It's really sad because this is what happens so many times. If you're working with a family or if you're a caregiver, people can say what they don't want all the time, but it's really hard for them to say what they want. So you could do this with your students, or you could do this with your kids or the families you serve, and ask them, what do you want in life? And then let's think about all those things we can do to get to that life that they want, right? Think about that. This is just another way of a one-page profile. This is how to tell your story. You can use this chart that right here that I'm giving you on this lifecoursetools.com. And this is a way to kind of start thinking about it, to form that beginning, middle, and end, because you can think about what you don't want, what you do want, and how you're going to get there. That's a great way to tell your story and to use that as a guide. On this lifecoursetools.com right here, there are so many things. There's what they call, that I didn't have time to put in the presentation tonight, but they have what they call a star chart. And on this star chart, they will put in the middle, they will put the child, for example, and then every piece of the star is a different type of support. So you have relationship-based, you have technology-based, community-based, eligibility-based, best ways, supportive, personal strengths. Each part of the star is a different way to support that child or that individual. And so you think about, oh, we need to pull things from the relationship for part of my story. I need to talk to them about how technology helped my story. I need to talk to them about what community-based services helped tell my story. So by using that star chart, you can then use that to help guide you to tell your story a little bit better. So in conclusion with all of that I've given you today, I would absolutely love to talk to you more about how we can tell your story. I would love if you need help or maybe some ideas. Maybe you want to, we can do a Zoom call together and you can tell me, hey, this is what I want to do and this is the stories that I want to share. That is something we can work with you on. And please know that there is no right or wrong way to tell your story. And I think if you all think about that, it kind of makes you less nervous. If you think, you know what I mean? Like it kind of takes that pressure off of you. And by filling out that one-page profile and by doing that life course tools, those can be the basis of your story. And then you can tell it however you want. Again, use those song lyrics, use those drawings, however you want to tell your story. So I hope the information that we gave you tonight, you find valuable. Go to those websites that we told you. You can work with us on it. I'd love to meet with you personally, whether in person, so we can practice. Maybe a couple of you want to do that and we can form a Zoom together and all work together and kind of practice. If that's something that you're interested in, you can send me an email, shoot me a text and let me know. Thank you for your time tonight. And you guys have a great evening. Thanks for joining us.